So again, I welcome you in behalf of Janub, the Association for the Union for Anti-Racism and Peace Policy, and to our lecture, Born in the Storm, to Become a Black Panther, the life story of Dhoruba al-Mujahid bin Wahad, told by himself. I shall spend a couple of minutes talking about the current developments which forced us to end our first very productive cooperation with our very productive cooperation with the Department of African Studies. And I'm sorry, we have a problem.
Feedback.
A feedback, yeah.
It's too loud. Es ist zu laut eingestellt, darum kommt das Feedback.
Okay. I think that's because maybe. Yeah. So, as I said before, I shall spend a couple of minutes talking about the current developments which forced us to end our at first very productive cooperation with the University of Vienna, and namely the Department for African Studies, before handing over to Mr. Dhoruba bin Wahad. And of course, first of all, I want to thank Dhoruba for coming the long way from the US to us to Vienna to hold this lecture today and tomorrow. And secondly, I want to thank to AfriPoint who hosted us today, and I want to say that it's not regular, it's not so normal in Vienna anymore to get hosted for a lecture. So AfriPoint is also an association, so there is a list in behind, so you can fill in your name and also give donations for this association hosting us. We as an association, Janub, focusing on anti-racist and anti-colonial struggles in the global south and of the people of color all over the world against white supremacy since more than 14 years, 15 years now. We started this year with a series of events about black radical struggles in the past and in the present. To fight especially the ahistorical debate and negation of responsibility of the old history and the new crimes of neocolonialism in the debates in Europe about anti-colonial struggles all over the world, the wars going on for years in the African and Arab countries. And as a survivor of the US war against the people of color, and especially against the black people and the Black Panther Party, and as a very engaged activist until today, we are very honored to being able to invite Dhoruba bin Wahad to give a lecture in Vienna. At that moment, when Dhoruba bin Wahad confirmed to take part and give a lecture in Vienna, we asked the Department for African Studies if they are interested in hosting or in a cooperation with us for a lecture at the university, at the Department for African Studies, to speak there about his life and his experience as a Black Panther activist, as a Black Panther member. And when all the details of this cooperation were consolidated and the lectures were announced on the website of the University of Vienna, the board of the Austrian Students' Union, the so-called ÖH, in particular the chairwoman of the Austrian Students' Union in Vienna, Mrs. Lena Köhler, and her colleague from the Jewish Austrian Student Union, Mr. Benjamin Hess, started to write emails to the Department for African Studies, saying that this is not acceptable, that they have a cooperation with us, and asking them, demanding them to stop any cooperation with our council, with our association. And as the Department for African Studies asked us for a statement about these accusations, we wrote a statement to the Department of African Studies, and they rejected the accusations of the ÖH and the Jewish ÖH, so the cooperation could go along. There was also an open letter signed by more than 120 academics from universities all over the world, UK, USA, Canada, South Africa. So the pressure groups had the problem that this open letter supported the University of Vienna, especially the Department for African Studies. So they had to increase the pressure against this lecture. And then they started with defamations against Dhoruba bin Wahad, saying Dhoruba is a former terrorist and he is a criminal. He was a member of a criminal gang, and the Black Panther Party are anti-Semites, and so on. Then there was a meeting of the Austrian Students' Union and the Jewish Austrian Students' Union with the rectorate of the University of Vienna, and they negotiated special conditions for the lecture at the University of Vienna. And these conditions were, first of all, as a result of this meeting, the first step was this lecture is no more a cooperation between the University of Vienna and Janub, but it must be a lecture, an event of the University of Vienna, and the inviter is the Department for African Studies and not Janub. The second condition was that the speaker, Dhoruba bin Wahad, have to agree to speak only of the topic of his life and his experience as a Black Panther and nothing more. If he violates this agreement and if he speaks about anything else, the dean, Mrs. Malzahn, is authorized to interrupt the event and to cancel the lecture during the lecture. This was the second, and then some other conditions that the rectorate and the Austrian Students' Union will have meetings in the future discussing definition of anti-Semitism and discussing which associations in the future could have cooperations with the University of Vienna and which cooperation can't have. We discussed this in a very urgent meeting with Dhoruba and asked him about his opinion and agreed to this unacceptable conditions because we thought it's more important that the lecture can be held on the university. But then, after we agreed to these conditions, the University of Vienna said, okay, but this lecture is not public anymore. It is a lecture inside the academic course of one professor, and it's only open for around 10 students. And at this point, of course, we said this has no sense for us anymore, since Dhoruba came from the US to make a public lecture and not a lecture on an academic level only for 10 students. So this is the status quo. Unfortunately, it ended with the end of the cooperation, and we are sure that the Austrian Student Union and the Jewish Austrian Student Union and other institutions who are involved in this pressure will be very happy to hear this now. This is the first thing that I want to say. I don't want to introduce Dhoruba in the long term because I think the lecture is almost about his life. So again, thank you, Dhoruba, for coming to Vienna. Thank you for staying with us, also in this struggle and this bullshit. I'm sorry. Thank you for coming here on this very, very hot evening. And Dhoruba, I give you the floor and hope you can. Thank you.
I'm going to stand up in a minute so folks in the back could see and hear better, but I haven't got my act together yet, so I'm sitting down. I want to say, first of all, thank you to the comrades and the progressive folks here in Vienna who invited me to speak to you, to talk to you about a Pan-African vision of of Africa, of the African diaspora, to perhaps enlighten you about certain experiences that people of African ancestry in the United States have had to contend with for the past few hundred years. And I also want to say that this is my first time in Vienna as a non-tourist. And I have been graciously received by everyone. I want to express my appreciation to everyone who has treated me so graciously and so kindly. And I just want to say that in the struggle for freedom and liberation, there are very few strangers, only comrades who have never met. And I feel that way, I felt that way whenever I'm amongst progressive people, whenever I am among people who decide to stand up and struggle for the best in humanity rather than lower themselves to the worst that human beings can be. So again, I want to thank you. I want to thank Marcus. I mean, these guys are great. And I just wanted to say that. And so having said that, I just came across some documents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation that my lawyer and my best friend, Robert J. Boyle, sent me, because I kept him abreast of what was going on with the university. And he got all agitated and excited when he realized they were trying to pigeonhole me as a quote, anti-Semitic terrorist and race baiter or whatever names. I've been called worse, so I didn't take it personally. But it offered me an opportunity to go in deeper into the reality that is the black experience in America. And I want to say that I know a little bit about, I know a little bit about Austrian and Western European history, just a little. And I know enough to know that, this is not going to work like this. Okay, let's do it this way. I know enough to understand that the trauma of World War II has significantly affected subsequent generations of Austrian and German people. Of course, it traumatized the whole world, but nowhere has this trauma been more deep and deep-seated and rooted in the historical and cultural history of the Germanic people than here in Austria and in Germany. And I think that as a result of that trauma, as a result of that national guilt, that the authorities have used the rubric, the camouflage of anti-Semitism to conceal the consolidation and the resurgence of the finance capitalists who underwrote the Second World War. We know today that the major corporations from Daimler, Benz, to Volkswagen, all of these companies here in Germany and in Austria, in Japan, Kawasaki and Mitsubishi, these were the manufacturers of the engines of war. These were the ones that made the Tiger tanks. These were the ones that made the high-powered artillery pieces. These were the ones that created the Wehrmacht. These were the forces. These were the capitalist, imperialist corporations and companies that created the trauma of the European purge of European Jewry, the genocide of European Jewry. And we must keep in mind that these individuals, these classes of people, these groups of people who inherited wealth are still in power and are still in control today in this government and across the EU. This is why whenever we speak about the perfidy, the history of Europe from the perspective of the oppressed, they want to silence you. They don't want you to know that the European Union is an expression and a continuation of white supremacy and is an expression and continuation of the hegemony that the Nazis sought to exert on people of color and on people across this world, around this world. So I just want to say that I didn't come here to talk about the state of Israel. I didn't come here to talk about the impact of Zionism on geopolitics in the region now called the Middle East. I came to talk about the black experience in America, my experience in America. I came to talk about the Black Panther Party and the rise of the Black Power movement and what happened to it. I came to talk about how we resisted an institution and a system of white supremacy that birthed the United States of America. And we must remember that the United States of America, much like Israel, was a European settler state. It started out as a colony of Britain, of the British Empire. It broke away from the British Empire and declared its independence and fought a war of revolution against the British Empire, wherein the leaders of that revolution, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, were all declared outlaws by the British Crown, and a price put on their head, dead or alive. They fought a war of liberation from the British, and they won. And today, the foremost purveyor of violence on the planet, the foremost enslaver of labor on the planet, is that former European settler state, now called the United States of America. It's very important to understand that I am not an American. I'm the victim of Americanism. I am not a U.S. citizen by choice. I'm a U.S. citizen by force, by the force and circumstance of history. The realization of this occurred to me when I was 15 or 14 years old. You know, some people look in the mirror when you're growing up and you're in adolescence and you're becoming a man. You look in the mirror one day and you got a little whisker on or something and you say, wow, I'm a man now. You look at yourself and you look at yourself differently. Well, one day I woke up, I looked in the mirror and I said to myself, you black. What does that mean? Everybody in my neighborhood was black. All of my friends were black. My family, everybody. I've never noticed it that way. But I did when I was about 14 or 15 years old. And there wasn't a particularly seminal event that caused me to make this realization. It was a realization that came to me from my teen years living in the South Bronx. You know, the South Bronx, when I grew up, was a community. It was a neighborhood. This was before the word neighbor was taken out of neighborhood, and it just became the hood. Now it's called the hood. No neighbor, just the hood. And before it was the hood, it was my neighborhood, where I could play on the streets as a 9 or 4 or 5-year-old and didn't have to worry about someone abducting me, stealing me, murdering me, or some pervert sodomizing me. I lived in a community that was more or less homogeneous, was more or less an extended family. This was before the plague of heroin descended on the black community. We're talking about the early 1950s. Basically, by 1951, I was 7 years old. 7 years later, I was 14 by 1958. So by 1958, and between 1951, right after World War II, the epidemic of heroin addiction swept over the African community in the United States. And it took a terrible toll on the African community. It decimated entire families. It turned children into thieves where they would rob and steal from their own mother. It turned women into prostitutes. It turned men into murderers. It was the plague that destroyed my neighborhood. And most of all, it was aimed at African American youth. It was designed as a form of chemical warfare, much like the Opium Wars. but a little more direct and a little closer to home. And then as I grew older, I went to prison right after a brief stint in the U.S. military. I was 18 years old. And when I went to prison, I began to read. And you know, the unique thing about prison back then is the prison guards were so stupid, and the prisons were so, the prison administration was so dumb, they didn't really realize the books that they had in the library. So I read Das Kapital from cover to cover. If you read Das Kapital, there's something wrong with you. If you could read that fine print, that's like reading War and Peace and finishing the book in like 2 nights. Nobody does that. Who reads War and Peace in 2 days? And so I read Das Kapital. I read different books on different empires, and I became a history buff. And the reason why I became a history buff, to go back a little further, before I went to prison, I went to public school in the South Bronx. And I had a history teacher named Mr. Larson. And he was a black history teacher. And he made history fascinating. He would portray the leaders of a historical period. He would jump up on his desk and act out dialogues. I mean, this guy was off the chain. But he made history fascinating. And I never forgot him, and I always pay tribute to him whenever I study history. Because we need to learn that academic institutions and teachers can be the most effective and important impact on our lives and on our children's lives. And so when I came here to Vienna, and I heard that this academic institution, the University of Vienna, was shutting down my talk based on something that people had given them, saying that, you know, this was an anti-Semitic statement here and this was an anti-Semitic statement there. I was kind of taken aback at first. But then I realized that the statement that know the truth and the truth will set you free was an incomplete statement. Because it's the people in power who determines what's true and what's untrue. It's the people in power who seek to perpetuate their rule and their control, who will distort history, who will distort the truth for their own benefit. And usually the educational system is in the forefront of this distortion and this deception. So educational institutions and teachers are vital and important to a democratic society and to teaching our children how to think and not what to think. And today, it's clear that the University of Vienna and that the educational institutions in Austria are bent on teaching Austrian children what to think and not how to think. And so I am honored to be here at this point in time, at this place in history, to throw cold water on that notion, to stand up in Vienna and say that the educational system in Vienna is a white supremacist proposition, and it's designed to miseducate the Austrian people so that they will become the enemies of humankind and not the liberators of human beings. That they will contribute, that a future generation of Austrian youth will contribute to the exploitation of people, of color, of poor people, of disenfranchised people, and the rape of this planet. This is what the educational system in Austria has as its foremost and primary objective: to mislead our youth, to miseducate our children, and most of all, to make them slaves to a system that is unfair, unjust, and undemocratic. So I think that I should talk about me, but every time I get an opportunity to talk about me, I wind up talking about everything else but me. And that might mean that I have a fragile ego and can't stand no scrutiny, or it means that I'm on a mission. And that mission is to speak truth to power. That mission is to stand up and speak for those who can't speak for themselves. And one of the things that I learned when I was in prison, and I learned when I was growing up, and when I was gangbanging, you know, I used to be a gangbanger. I was in, you know, the local street gangs and everything. I learned one thing, that I did not like bullies. I did not like bullies. And the biggest bully in our community was the police, was the armed agents of the state. And they bullied us. They terrorized us. They used to beat us. They used to take us and put them in their squad car and drive us to the most racist section of New York City and kick us out the car and leave us at the mercy of the street gangs in Italian neighborhoods, in Irish neighborhoods. And sometimes we had to run all the way home. I ran home one time so fast and in such fear that I ran past my house. Ran past it. I ran past my neighborhood. I want to tell you that man's social being, or human being's social being, is their thinking is determined by their social being. Our thinking is determined by who we are in the society and where we are at any historical and given point. So where are we in Austria right now, in the year 2018, on the 21st of June? We are experiencing a heat wave, unprecedented in Austrian summers. I mean, we are in a place that doesn't even have a fan because you never expected it to get this hot. I mean, this is cool. This is all right with me. We should sweat together. Those who sweat together stay together. So we are here sweating, and you are here suffering to hear what I have to say. And I just want to say to you, I am deeply humbled and honored by your presence. I really am. And I do want to impart to you some very basic things. I think some of you know that right now, as we sit here, the greatest humanitarian crisis on the planet, according to the United Nations, is the situation in the Congo. Where as we speak, every hour, 43 women are raped in the Congo. Every hour. Over the past 5 or 6 years, close to 1 million people have been murdered and mutilated in the Congo. Right now, over 380,000 young people, men, women, and children, are on the verge of starvation and malnutrition. It's a Holocaust. It's a catastrophe of unprecedented proportions, and it's completely man-made. It's completely the result of European policy on the African continent. It's the complete result of the inhumanity of Western civilization's treatment of people of African ancestry. Now, while we are experiencing this in the Congo, there's another humanitarian crisis brewing in the Sudan, in southern Sudan, where millions of people again are on the verge of starvation. The French, the United States, are building an army to fight a war. I call it the syndicate wars, the new wars for the mineral resources of Africa, across the entire Sahel, across the length and breadth of Africa. The US military, the French military, and the European and the EU and NATO have deployed tens and thousands of troops to train indigenous armies, militaries, and police to manage and micromanage their access to resources in Africa. These cell phones that we use and we take for granted every day, the contents of these cell phones come from the Congo. Without coltan, we wouldn't have a cell phone, which means that all of these companies, from iPhone to Motorola to Samsung, have a vested interest in the Holocaust that's happening in the Congo. They are the ones that are supplying the money to the militias that are enslaving the people, that's got them working in the mines, or the bauxite mines and the coltan mines, and extracting uranium and extracting the strategic minerals that make your life comfortable. We are living in a lap of comfort here, while people in the third world suffer miserably for our well-being. I want to bring that message to you from Africa. Not my message. I want to bring the message to you that what's happening on the African continent to people of color is a crime. And it's being committed by the EU, and it's being committed by your allies, and Austria is complicit in this crime. I can't change the Austrian government. You know that the rise of the right in Europe is a phenomenon that is typical in every European nation in the EU. Brexit is a white supremacist vote on migration and immigration. The rise of Le Pen and his party in France, the same thing. Here in Austria, I'm told, and I've seen and I've read, how the right has increased its presence in the Austrian parliament. How they've increased their influence over Austrian foreign policy. And we see that the institutions like the University of Vienna are in lockstep with this right-wing resurgence, with this rise of what I call democratic fascism. And people say, well, what do you mean by democratic fascism? What I mean is, we know what the old definition of fascism was. It was the unholy alliance and marriage of finance, capital, and the state. We know how it materialized, how it used the ideology of racism and anti-Semitism and white supremacy to lull an entire population to sleep and allow their leadership and their political elite to commit genocide and murder on an industrial scale. So we know what the consequences is of old school fascism. We knew where it took us. It took us to war. It took us to the collapse of our societies. It took us to the brink of destruction. But now here we are in the 21st century. We're comfortable. We've rebuilt Europe, thanks to the Marshall Plan. And we're back in pocket. We're raising our children in relative peace. But yet, we know in our heart of hearts that every crisis in the world today is of our doing. Is a consequence of injustices that we've inflicted on people of color yesterday, and that has never been resolved. Pick any conflict that you want. Syria, a creation of the French, the British, and the victors of World War I. Lebanon, the creation of the French and British in World War II, in World War I. Modern Egypt. All of these countries were created whole cloth by the victors of the First and Second Imperial Wars. Millions of Africans died in Europe for your freedom. They fought on the side of the French. They fought on the side of the British. African Americans died fighting in an army that was segregated. They died for you. For your fellowship, your adherence to a philosophy and an ideology that was racist, white supremacist, and inhumane. And that guilt still sits with you to the point where the mere mention of that period of time causes universities like Vienna's university to have a knee-jerk response to anyone that criticizes the Israeli state. It's out of guilt. Believe me, it's out of guilt. It's not a belief that somehow Israel is a free society. There's not a person in this room, I think, who's have read anything about the founding and establishment of the European settler state of Israel that can say that it's a democracy. In fact, can say that it has any right to the lands of the Palestinian people. But we're being force-fed this narrative that it does. Were it not for fascism in the mid-20th century, were it not for the rise of Nazism, were it not for Japanese imperialism in the Far East, there would be no state of Israel. The Balfour Agreement, signed at the turn of the 20th century, did not guarantee a state of Israel. The League of Nations did not guarantee that the mandate that the British control, that is now the territory of Palestine, would become an independent state of Israel. What guaranteed the state of Israel's existence was the Holocaust in Western Europe. That's what gave it the moral and ethical legitimacy to take another people's land, to run them off of their land, to destroy their culture, and then call it a national homeland. They would have never have been able to do it if it wasn't for you. So you're responsible. You're responsible for the suffering of the Palestinian people. You're responsible for the suffering of people in that area, in that region. You're responsible for the wars that took place. You're responsible for the dislocation of millions of people and the suffering of families. You are responsible. Now you might say, well, I didn't have anything to do with it. I wasn't even born. My children, I don't have anything to do with it. And that well may be. I remember when Malcolm X was addressing some students in the UK. And one of the students said, oh, well, Mr. X, you say that, that the British and white supremacy, enslaved your people and brought about this situation that we have today. But I'm not responsible. I wasn't there. I didn't do it. And I imagine some of you are Christians, and some of you may be Muslims, and you know that the sins of the father will be visited upon their children. And Malcolm responded that although you weren't there, and I wasn't there either, but you're here now, and I'm here now, and I'm going to make you pay for it. And that's what I'm here for, to make you aware that you have to pay for what you have done. Not with money. No, not with cash. You have to pay with your humanity. It's your humanity that will make you different from all of that preceded you. It's your humanity that will make you rise above the white supremacy of the EU, the exclusionary policies. People are fleeing to this continent, to the metropoles of Europe, in life rafts, on dinghies, drowning in the Mediterranean, trying to make a better life for themselves. They're coming from a land and a place that has been destroyed by European imperialism, ravaged by the greed of Europe and the West. Their societies can't sustain them. So they flee for a better life. And what do? You turn your backs on them. You say that they are migrants, that we got to keep Europe white. Let's make Europe white again. You sound like the baboon and the idiot Donald Trump. Let's make America great again. When he says, let's make America great again, you know what that says to me? That we're going back to the plantation. Because that's when America was great, when we were on the plantation. The primitive accumulation of capital that the slave trade gave to the West and to Europe is the basis for your wealth. My ancestors died in the Middle Passage so that you today could enjoy the wealth and prosperity that is your society. They died. Now, I know that none of you were there, but I'm here to remind you. That's what Allah put me on this planet for, to remind you of who you are and what you did, and tell you that you are no longer that. You don't have to continue that. You're better than that. I know I have comrades here who are human beings who cry when children die for no reason. So I know your humanity lurks inside of you, but your institutions contain that humanity, redirect that humanity towards policies and towards attitudes that are completely contrary to what you would want for yourself and for your children. We are living in a world today that's a global village. We can no longer turn our backs on each other. I was telling Oliver today that I saw a video. I don't know if y'all saw it. on Facebook where a baby was drowning in the pool, an infant, a baby was drowning in a public pool, and everybody in the public pool just took pictures of the baby dying. Not one person went to save the baby. What have we become? What the hell have we become when we could watch an infant drown and stream it on Facebook? What have we become? I cannot relate to that type of inhumanity. I'm sorry, I can't relate to it. And I believe that none of you here can relate to that either. I have to believe that, because if I didn't, none of you would be sitting here suffering this heat if you didn't, because I know I wouldn't. So I just want to say that my purpose for coming here was not so much to talk about me, but to use my history as a metaphor for you. You should know these things. You should hold your government accountable. I cannot hold the Austrian government accountable to anything, but the Austrian people can. You are the people. You are the reason that government exists. You are the reason those educational institutions exist. Without you, they have no meaning, they have no efficacy, they have no morality, they're irrelevant without you. And I think you have to empower yourself. And that's one of the things we did in the Black Panther Party. We sought to empower ourselves and our community. You know, when the Black Panther Party started in 1966 in Oakland, California, it started as a reaction to police brutality. It wasn't a revolutionary movement. It was a reactionary movement to white supremacy and police brutality in the black community. And the minute that the Black Panther Party stood up against the police and against this vicious murder of African youth and used guns to defend themselves, the NRA, the National Rifle Association, and the gun lobby in America passed a law, they call it the Panther Law, the Black Panther Law, to make it illegal to carry guns in public in California. But before then, it was okay. As soon as the Black Panther Party started challenging the police said, well, hey, he got a gun. Yeah, pig, I got a gun, and you got a gun. Go for your gun. Go ahead, go ahead. And I used to watch Huey antagonize him, and I used to just love it. I used to love it. I couldn't help it. I used to love it. Huey would say, I have a right to watch you perform your duty, pig. He never called them police officers. They was always pigs, still are. He said, I'm standing 25 feet away from you. He had a law book in one hand and a shotgun in the other. And he said, according to California law such and such and such and such, I have a right as a citizen to watch you perform your duty, pig. And I can advise the person that you're talking to that you don't have to say nothing to this officer, to this pig. If you're going to arrest him, you should arrest him and take him into custody. That brutality and that treatment is not necessary. And then when the police returned to Huey and said, well, first of all, you need to move on. So I'm not going nowhere, pig. And the pig would say, well, I'm going to arrest you, and then arrest me, pig. And if arrest me. And he would look at Huey, he would look at Bobby, he would look at the Forte brothers, and they were armed to the teeth. He took a second thought, maybe I shouldn't arrest these guys. Maybe it's not too smart right now to arrest them. You see? After all, they're exercising their constitutional rights. They're not outside the law. So they had to change the law. And they changed the law. But in changing the law, they made the Black Panther Party outlaws. They made the Black Panther Party criminals. They said that our only reason for existence was to kill cops. They said the same thing that the University of Vienna said about me when they invited me here. They said that our gang was about killing policemen. And that's what we existed for. That everybody in the United States had a right to self-defense but us. We didn't have that right. And so this history of armed self-defense was nothing new in America. Before the Black Panther Party, there was the Lowndes County Black Panthers. Before the Panthers of the Civil Rights era, there were black men and women who defended the integrity of the black community, that defended themselves against the Night Riders and the Ku Klux Klan, that defended our community with guns, that defended their family, and they had that right. But by the 1960s and the height of the Vietnam War, it became apparent that black people in the United States were going to be silent no more about their oppression. Every insurgency, every major so-called riot in the 60s, the reason for those riots was police murder and brutality of some black man or some black woman. That's what started every riot. And to this day, when we hear about Black Lives Matter taking to the streets over police brutality, we say, well, this is an upsurge in resistance to police brutality, but Black Lives Matter has been classified by the government as a terrorist organization, as a terrorist association. Thank you. I must be sweating like a Brahmo bull. I know, I feel like it. Now, I come from Africa, so this is cool for me, but it is a little bit much. But it's a little bit much here. But thank you very much for the tissue paper. You see how people are. People are very considerate when we want to be, and very inconsiderate when we are forced to be. So I just want to say that the Black Panther Party was not a phenomenon out of the clear blue sky. There's a radical tradition in America that has existed all the way from the days of the bullwhip days, or the days of slavery, the days of chattel slavery. There were always rebellions on the plantation. There were always rebellions every day, all the time, for over 300 years. We did not go silently into the night. Africans did not submit to their slavery. My ancestors fought back. They resisted. And they resisted in different ways. Some resisted overtly and physically with slave rebellions, and led to violent clashes with the plantation owners and the slave masters. Others led, especially African women, by nurturing our children, by keeping them alive, by keeping the light of freedom burning in their heart, that one day we will be free, that one day we will be free. Back then, we dreamt freedom dreams, and we dreamt those dreams together. Today, we don't dream freedom dreams together. We have intersectional differences now, you see. We are oppressed differently now. I disagree with that proposition. I've always maintained that the primary contradiction that we have to deal with is the contradiction between the people and those who will control the people. That I wouldn't care what your intersectional beefs are, as long as you are on the same side of the barricades with me. It's my relationship to the enemy and your relationship to the enemy of the sun, that Greg came here several weeks ago to talk about. I know many of you are familiar with that Palestinian poem, The Enemy of the Sun. Go back and read it again. That poem was an inspiration to me in prison. It was an inspiration to me in the 60s, and it still is an inspiration to me today. These people have proven, finance, capitalism, and the greed of the West has proven that they are enemies of the sun. They are enemies of creation. They are enemies of this planet. They are enemies of our humanity. And how we could allow them to do what they do is because we are afraid. We are fearful to stand up and challenge them. So I suggest to you that if you can't challenge them directly, speak out against it. Speak out against oppression. If you can't do that, then as Muslims are urged, hate it in your heart. And if you can, make jokes about those in power. Because one thing I've learned, people in power and dictators, they hate it when you laugh at them. They cannot handle you laughing at them. Believe me, they would destroy this world if you just rolled around on the ground laughing at them. So what are you laughing at? What are you laughing at? They would go crazy. Just laugh at them. Make jokes out of them. You see? And that's the way a lot of us go through this. You know, we treat it like a joke. But I said that as in passing to say that only a person with no shame can't stand to be laughed at. If you have no shame, then nothing's funny. Everything is real. But if you have shame, if you have modesty, if you have a degree of humility, then people could laugh at you and you'll just drop your head and it'll be funny to you too. You know? But you can't do that with people in power who have no shame. So if we can't destroy them, we should laugh them off the planet. That's one strategy. I don't believe it's a complete strategy, but it has its advantages. Because some of the things these guys do are crazy. I mean, it's hilarious if it wasn't so serious. So what I'm trying to say here is that throughout my sojourn in America, I've always managed to keep a sense of humor. I've always managed to laugh at what was profane and decry what was inhumane. I had to have a sense of humor in order to survive. And maybe I developed a morbid sense of humor, but I did develop a sense of humor. And I found out one time when I couldn't get into Israel. You know, they wouldn't let me in to Palestine. And we were going back and forth, and they asked me, so what's the purpose of your visit? I said, well, I was here at the invitation of a Palestinian youth, a student youth group that invited me here to talk about political prisoners, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They said, well, who invited you? They asked for names, and I gave them the names. And so they said, well, I said, so what is the problem here? He said, well, you know, we're in a state of war here. You know, we have to be very careful who we let into Israel. I said, but I'm not going to Israel. I'm going to Palestine. They said, no, you're going to Israel. I said, you got this twisted. I was invited to Palestine. You know, and the guy said to me, well, first of all, sir, you can't go anywhere unless we authorize it. I said, I know that. He said, and this is Israel. And I turned around and I looked at the bridge, the King Hussein bridge that I just got off, and the bus I just got off. And I looked back across the bridge of Jordan, and I looked at this guy, and I was in this big, you know, processing center. And I said, so you work for the PLO? He said, what did you say? I said, you said that you're in front of me and you're processing me and I'm visiting Palestine, so you must work for the PLO, right? And this guy was like, he was gradually getting so worked up that it became funny to me. And so I had a smirk on my face. So he realized that I was just having a go at him, right? So then he got really militaristic, you know, and authoritarian. Step into the next room. Okay, I stepped into the next room. Here comes this young Israeli soldier. He's going to strip search me, right? So he comes into the room. He says, take off your clothes. I said, excuse me? He says, take off your clothes. I said, I don't go that way. He said, what did you say? I said, you know, I don't play that. He said, what do you mean? I said, I mean, you might be about the hard stuff, but not me. I like girls. He turned beet red. And I was just having to go at him. I know what he wanted. I was just having to go at him. So he ran out the room and came back with somebody else. And they stood there. Sir, you have to take off your clothes and be searched by this officer. I said, why? For contraband. I said, but I don't have any contraband. Sir, you have to strip down and take off your clothes and to be searched. Okay, so after I put them through all of these changes, I took off my clothes. Then I was in jail 19 years. Getting stripped on the fly is no biggie for me. It wasn't a biggie, Take off your clothes, spread your cheeks, Wasn't no biggie. But he didn't know that. You see? So he didn't know that. So I would tease them, and I would goad them. And I would goad them with humor, with absurdity. And one of them came up to me when they had been searching my bags. He said, "You like rap music?" I said, "No, I don't like rap music." He said, "Really?" I said, "No, I don't like rap music." He says, "Oh, so what kind of music do you like?" I said, "I like revolutionary music." He said, "What's revolutionary music?" And I start telling him about, Public Enemy or something, or, Death to the Pigs and all of this stuff, And he said, "I never heard that." I said, "You should try it." And this guy actually thought he was bonding with me. He thought he was bonding with me. And I'm just saying this to show you that those people who enforce the state's laws and policies, these armed agents of the state, are human beings just like you and me, with fears and anxieties, just like you and me. And what was the major defense at Nuremberg? I was just following orders, wasn't it? Shoveling people in the oven didn't bother you? Just following orders, sir. Really? How could you just follow orders? That kernel of inhumanity is the same kernel of inhumanity that people had at that swimming pool that watched that baby drown. It's the same thing. And what I'm trying to emphasize here is that lurking inside each of us is the capacity to be inhumane. Not by design, but by pure unawareness of our own self as a human being. One person told me one time, and I told you this, one person said, I think it was in Facebook, they didn't tell me, it was in Facebook somewhere, and he said, it was a woman, and she said that until you love the helpless animal, there's a part of your humanity that's never been touched. And I thought about that. And I thought about who is the most faithful friend that I ever had. And it was my dog. My dog. When he died, I cried like a baby. This dog had saved my life and my family's life twice in Africa. He didn't like nobody but us. He was totally antisocial, but he was my dog. And I brought him all the way from Africa to America. He died at 15 years old. And I realized that everything that I went through for the past 15 years, that dog was right there with me. Good times, bad times. The dog never changed. I could be miserable. He'll put his big head in my lap and look up at me, and I wasn't so miserable anymore. So what I'm saying is, we have a certain kernel in our humanity that if we cover it over, if we don't get in touch with it, we are not human beings anymore. We are subjected to the power and the whims of anybody that comes along that decides to manipulate us or intimidate us. But when we are in touch with our humanity, no one could oppress us. No one could exploit us. No one could take advantage of us. If we're just in touch with who we are as human beings and say, that's wrong what you're doing. You have to say to your government, what's being done to migrants in the EU is wrong. Because we created the conditions that they're fleeing from in their country. We created it. Imperialism and Eurocentric control of their cultures and their society created those conditions. And now they flee those conditions for a better life, and you want to turn your backs on them? You want to say, keep Europe white? You didn't say Africa for the Africans when you went in there and took all their land and their resources. I mean, the British have a commonwealth of African and former colonies. The only thing held in common is their wealth by the British. That's all. That's what that really means. The British hold in common the wealth of everybody. They print their money. Could you imagine if Russia printed Austrian money? Just think about that. How absurd that sounds, right? It sounds absolutely absurd. But no African country prints its own money. Maybe South Africa. I said maybe because I'm not certain about South Africa. And the reason why I say that is because the rand is an exchange currency. No country that one of the former imperial countries print money in is on the exchange market. I have Ghanaian cedis in my pocket. They're absolutely worthless here. Worthless. It's like monopoly money. It's worthless all over Europe. French CFAs, worthless. You know, reals from Morocco, worthless outside of the country. That's because they don't print their own money. And as Sarkozy said, if you think we're going to let other countries that were former colonies print their own money, you're crazy. This is Sarkozy, former president of France, which means to us that if you think that the EU and you think that Europe is on your side and wants you to develop, you're crazy. That's what it's telling us. But you don't know this history. Your children aren't taught this history. In guilt, you're taught that Austria and Germany made the mistakes of anti-Semitism and elevated the extermination of European Jewry to the level of state policy. And you want to distance yourself from that history and that past. And I can understand that. But you have to first fess up to it before you can distance yourself from it. You have to first say, this is not us. You can't hide behind some rubric that Zionist European settlers put out to cover their atrocities. How many of you took to the streets when the Palestinians were being murdered on the border wall just in the last few weeks? Over 132 Palestinians killed by snipers who were no threat to the Israelis, who presented no physical threat to anybody. They were just protesting for their rights to self-determination. They were protesting the occupation of their land, and they were gunned down by snipers who celebrated when they killed them. But that's all right. That's okay by you. Over 2,000 wounded, that's okay. These atrocities that's being carried out against women and children in the Gaza, that's okay. Israel has a right to defend itself. So it commits murder, and that's okay. And then when someone comes to the university in your country who's critical of that behavior, they're anti-Semitic. Well, if we want to talk about anti-Semitism, first of all, the Ashkenazis of Europe don't fall into that category. They got about as much Eastern blood in them as the Tsar of Russia had, as Tsar Nicholas had. They don't come from that place. They don't come from Kazakhstan and all of those places where modern converted European Jewry come from. Is not Palestine. And everybody knows that. So what's the point here? The point is to rewrite history to suit those who have appropriated the land and taken the land and make them look like heroes and make them look like liberators when in fact they're dogs, they're oppressors, they're exploiters, they're usurpers of other people's land. That's what they are. You don't want to call them that because it's anti-Semitic? How is it anti-Semitic? They're not Semites. They're Europeans. Anti-Semitism, as applied to them, is a Western European construct. It's the Western European nations and elites and classes that oppressed and exploited and demonized European Jewry. It's a European construct. It's not an African construct. It's not an Islamic construct. It comes from Europe. And it's their treatment of other Europeans who they deemed were less than human. So they felt ultimately that it was okay to exterminate these people. And then you want to turn around and put it on me? I don't like Jews? Me? Moi? Seriously. The person that got me out of prison, I don't know how much of you have read any of these books or know anything about my past. The woman that got me out of prison, may Allah be pleased with her, was a red diaper baby. And her name couldn't get no more Jewish than Fink. It was Elizabeth M. Fink. And the other person can't get no more Jewish than Bloom. Robert J. Bloom. Two American Jews freed me from prison. Do you think for 1 minute that me would look upon them as someone deserving of ridicule, of hatred? The personal is political, and the political is personal. I believe Audre Lorde said that. I might be mistaken because, you know, I'm a little rusty on my feminist politics. Don't take it, y'all girls, don't hold it against me. I mean well, but I believe it's Audre Lorde. It might be somebody else. It might, Bell Hooks. I think it was Bell Hooks, might have been. But I'm quite sure I'll get corrected on Facebook because they're streaming live right now and the sisters will be on me. Brother, you know it was so and so and so. You know, I know they're going to jump all over me, but I'm saying the personal is political and the political is personal. What does that mean? That means what you choose to do personally in your life has a political consequence. You may say, well, who I love is a personal matter, and it is true, who you love is a personal matter. But what happens when that personal love transcends the norms, transcends the status quo, becomes different than what other people expect? Then you're looked at differently, aren't you? You're looked at as a trans, you're looked at as gay, you're looked at as this, you're looked at as that. You see? But it's your humanity that beats inside your heart that distinguishes you from everybody else, that makes you a person, that makes you someone, that gives you life on this planet, in this place. So all I want to say to you, and I know a lot of you have questions, and like I said, I didn't talk about myself. I talked about those things that morally and ethically motivate me and have motivated me for the past 75 years. That's what I wanted to talk about when I came here. I didn't want to talk about the Black Panther Party and how we used to stare down the pigs and how we used to do this or how we started the breakfast program. I know y'all all ask those questions and then I'll answer them. I wanted to talk about the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that I'm a human being that decided to resist what was done to my people and to hold account those who profit from it today and who continue it under different guises. That's the choice I made. I paid for it. I paid for it with loss of family. I paid for it. But every time I look at my boy, my 15-year-old, my 9-year-old, I realize that it was worth it. I realize that they're having a childhood because I stood up for something. And I think you should take that upon yourself too. And if nothing comes out of this talk, I hope it comes out, one thing comes out, that each one of you commit yourselves to stand up and stand in where you know it's right to do so. And don't back down. Don't let them scare you. Stand up for what you think is right. Austria is important. It's important in the scheme of things in Europe. Why? Because of its history, because of the role it played in creating the world that we live in today. There was a time this region was an empire that controlled far-flung places in Africa and around the world. These are your ancestors. They created this world that you are inhabiting right now. So it's up to you to make a difference, to change it from what they created, that took lives, that sacrificed people, to change it into something better. So when people talk about Austria, they say, you Austrian, huh? Oh, that's great. That's what you want people to say, right? I mean, right or wrong, you want people to say to you, man, hey, you're Austrian, man, that's cool. You don't want people to say, you're Austrian, hey, seriously? I'm sorry. You don't want people to say that. You know, and when I have people come to me in Africa and say, oh, you know, I lived in New York for 15 years. I say, my apologies. They say, huh? I said, my apologies, I feel sorry for you. He said, ain't you from New York? I said, yeah, that's why I'm saying I'm sorry. You know, I feel a little responsible for you buying that dream and going there to find out what it was like. And then when you talk to him, he'll tell you how he hates the place, how he couldn't wait to get out of there. He thought it was something and it wasn't. This is what they all say. But don't let them say that about Austria. Don't let people come here and say, man, I'm so glad I can get out of there. You don't know. Let them come here and say, like I'm saying, I mean, I only had good experiences here. Although I'm a history buff and I know the history, that don't apply to the people that I met. It doesn't. The people that I met are conscious. The people that I met are considerate. The people that I met are humane. The people that I met are smart, courageous. These are the people I met. So when you talk to me about Austrians, these are the type of people I'm going to mention. These are the type of people I'm going to talk about. Oh, yeah? Do you know Oliver? You know Marcus? You know so-and-so? Because these are my cronies, man. These are my homies in Austria. You know? Like I got friends in Turkey. I met them the same way. You know? They've always stood for something. They've always fought the good fight. And one of the things I've learned in this life, if I didn't learn anything else, it's not that you win in your fights. It's not that you become the victor or that you're right. It's the fact that you fight. The liberation is in the struggle, not in the end result. We might never see the end results of the struggles that we wage right now. Maybe our children will, and maybe our children's children will. We may never see it, but we know that our children would say, my mama, my daddy fought for me. That's what I want to hear. That's what you should want your children to hear when they look up to you and say, Dad, I'm proud of you. When he sits in his history class and they lie to him about history and he raises his hand and your son says, he throws that question out there that has everybody stumped. So what about so-and-so during the slave trade? And the teacher goes, Well, we're not talking about that. Yeah, but that's why I'm asking you, teacher. That's why I'm asking you. And the teacher can't answer. I'm proud of that boy when he does that. You should be proud of your boys and your girls when they do that. When they question authority, when they question people, when they question those who say something is right and they feel like it's wrong, they question it. We have to raise a generation of people who can think, not people who are followers and sheep. So I want to open everything to question and answers, and I know Oliver and Marcus are totally disappointed with me for not talking about the Black Panther Party and not talking about the BLA. So I know that y'all are going to ask me questions about that, so that's how we'll deal with it. But I just want to talk more about our humanity and how we owe ourselves and our children this humanity. That we can make a difference in this place, in this time, in this century, right now, in a Europe that is headed towards a terrible end. All over Europe, the rise of white supremacy and racism is rearing its ugly head again. What are we going to do about it? How do we stop it? How do we change it? Our planet is dying. We're killing it. Well, they're killing it. The corporations are sucking the life out of our planet. What are we going to do about it? Globalization? Hey, I define it as New Age imperialism. And that's what I was supposed to talk about. What is New Age imperialism? How does it work? How is it, how do you see it manifesting itself in Africa? All these intellectual and academic questions I was supposed to talk about. But I realized that if you could suffer this heat, you didn't want to hear that shit. You didn't want to hear that stuff. You want to hear about something more important, how we could change this world that we're living in based on our humanity, based on our love for each other, for our children. It is all about love, and it's true, but it's first about love of self, love of your own integrity. And from there goes love of family, and then love of community, and then love of nation. And then when you get to the nation, and the nation is like this, steeped in dogma, steeped in inequality, steeped in racism, then you have to say, hey, well, my love can't extend to this nation. I have to do something. And I have to change this. So I just want to say thanks for you. And I know many of you want to get out of here and get some fresh air. I know I do. And so let's take some questions. And hopefully I can answer your questions or point you in the right direction. And did any of you read this book, by the way? Look for Me in the Whirlwind? Well, I got a couple of essays in there. And I'm trying to publish a new book, which I call The Future Past. And it's a bio story of my life in America. But I don't, as you noticed, I didn't want to talk about myself. So in my bio story, I don't talk about me, I talk about my generation. I talk about my family, how they came to America, how they grew up in Harlem, how they came from the West Indies, how that translated into the South Bronx and me becoming who I am. We all are a product of a history. And I want to write that his story. It's his story. I want to write her story. I want to write this story, not so much about me, but about my generation and what made me into who I am and how I feel. So I think that if you guys could ask those types of questions, I would really like to answer those in political terms, but I'm totally focused on our humanity here, on how we can reclaim it, on how we could make ourselves more humane, more involved in the lives of people who are not as well off as we are. So I'll end here, and again, thanks to Oliver, Marcus, Dar, Janub, and all of the progressive people that brought me here. And I'll never forget this moment, and I hope I can return. And I hope I can return with a battery of professors from Black Studies programs to debate those at the University of Vienna who think that what I have to say is criminal and what I have to say is anti-Semitic. So I'm right now recruiting heads of departments in America, imams who are eager to come over here and cross swords with the intellectuals of academia here over the accurate portrayal of Western history and our experience. So we're trying to do that in the future. We want to throw down this gauntlet. And if the university don't invite them, then you should. Because you need to have this type of conversation. We need to talk about the ideas that shape our lives, the experiences that make us who we are. And you need to know this history just like we need to know yours. Just like we need to understand the nuances of what it means to be Austrian, to be young and Austrian now in the 21st century. What does it mean to you? How do you see it? How do you see what's stopping your future? What's stopping you from having a future? How do you see your place on this planet? These are the important questions that make us a global community. These are the questions that are important, not whether my analysis of finance capital is correct to the last T, or whether, you know, my anthropological proposition on the evolution of the human species is correct or incorrect. Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, it's okay. But what I want to know is, who are you? And what do you stand for? And how together can we change this? That's what I want to know. So, any questions? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. There's a mic here.
Assalamu alaikum, Mr. Wahad.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Very welcome to Vienna. I have a question about empowerment. Early at your beginning at your talk, you talked about that we as people, we should empower ourselves. And I would like you to talk a little bit more about that, maybe related to the Black Panther movement also. I ask this because I would like to know what the best, most effective way would be to empower yourself as maybe a group activist, because I see a lot of young activist people in Austria or in Vienna especially. There are some who are in a lot of groups, and there are some who were active but then was kind of exhausted. As you talked about human being, a lot of them saw like they really put so much effort to it, and then the right movement was so high that they kind of felt, what is the point? So maybe you can give a little bit more about the experience you had with Black Panther, and what you can give to us, how to be the most effective way to empower ourselves. Thank you.
Well, of course, I believe in mass mobilization. I believe that people, that everybody should join an organization that reflects what you really feel, that reflects your politics, your consciousness. Everybody should join some type of formation, some type of organization, and they should urge that organization to unite with other organizations and groups and activists who share some of the same views. I believe organization is the key to mass mobilization. Having said that, I know it can be disheartening. I know that the right and the status quo, they seem to have endless power and resources, while we, on the other hand, we have very few resources. And we try to do a lot with very little. And it could be discouraging. And then, you know, when I came out of jail, to give you a vignette, when I came out of prison after doing 19 years, I saw a lot of things that started to make me feel like, after a few years, what was the point? Why did you do that? I mean, it didn't change anything. People are still crazy, and stuff is still mad, you know, what was the point? You know, you can get discouraged, you can be disheartened, you know? And then I came across this, I was at this event in Harlem, and this young woman came up with a little boy. The boy must have been about 5 or 6. And she came up to me and she said, "Sir, could you say something to my son?" I said, "What?" I said, "Excuse me?" She said, "I told him all about you and he's always wanted to meet you." That made everything I did worthwhile. That little boy. That one little boy made what I did worthwhile. Not the mass movements, not the people at the rallies, not the signs, none of that. The little boy. Why? Because that meant something to that mother and that child, and that's why I did it. So I'm saying to you, your humanity is what motivates you, and if you let go of it, if you doubt it, if you doubt your potency, then you're beaten, you're defeated. But if you say, I'm going to keep going until I can't go no more, I'm going to attend this rally. I'm going to take time off this job for an hour. I'm going to leave early, and I'm going to be there. I'm going to make my voice heard. You do that, and it might change one life. It might save one life. Then everything that you sacrificed, everything that you did was worthwhile. So don't look for the victory on the mass level. You know, Rome didn't die in a day, you know. There must have been about, what, 2 generations before Rome collapsed? So we might be in the 2nd generation of the collapse of the American empire right now. But it will collapse. It will be replaced. And hopefully it will be replaced by people like you who have humanity and compassion and who care about things, who care about people in this planet. Hopefully that's what will replace it, but it won't replace it if we don't organize against them. If we don't organize in our workplace, if we don't organize in the schools, if we don't do the types of stuff that Janub is doing, fighting against Islamophobia, fighting against the treatment of people who are powerless, standing up for people who can't speak for themselves, demanding accountability from our government, saying to the right and to these white supremacists that I'm not going to follow you down that path anymore because it only leads to death and destruction and war. We went down that path how many times in Europe? And where did it lead us? To death, destruction, and war. Has it ever led us anyplace else? Tell me, has white supremacy and the white man's burden ever led Europe to any place else other than war? It hasn't. So, the fact that they got power now, the fact that they're in positions of control now, and that we are less powerful, that we have fewer resources, don't mean that we're counted out of the struggle. It only means that we have to unite across gender, across ideology, across race, across class, and realize that we have a stake in the human development on this planet. That we have a stake in the way this world goes. And we're not going to let nobody lead us to war and hell and damnation again. Nobody. And that's what we have to organize against. So I hear you. I mean, it happens everywhere. When's the last time you seen Black Lives Matter in the streets in the U.S.? People get burned out. People get distracted and they get into their little niche and they struggle where they can. The status quo depends on that we will exhaust ourselves, that we will get tired. You see? But revolutionaries don't get tired. Revolutionaries don't grow old. They're too bold to grow old. Revolutionaries change society. Revolutionaries make a difference in history. You don't remember the reactionaries most of the times and the snitches and the informers. Who remembers them? But you remember the great people in history. You remember the Fidel Castros. You remember the Ho Chi Minhs. You remember these people. Why? Because they never gave up. Have you ever read Ho Chi Minh's poem from prison? How many of you have read Ho Chi Minh's poems from prison? That's one of the poems, in fact, that George Jackson took. When the dragon is released, the imperialists will tremble. Ho Chi Minh honed his leadership skills in prison, in a French prison. Fidel Castro, you know, his first attempt at the Moncada barracks, it was a failure, wasn't it? And he went to prison. And after he came out of prison, he was a completely dedicated revolutionary who knew what he had to do in order to win. And he won. And Fidel Castro outlived how many U.S. presidents? I must have been like 4 of them, 4 or 5 of them. We're talking about presidents that had 4-year terms each, some 2. So he outlived them all. And he was the greatest friend that Africa ever had, was Fidel Castro. He didn't send just troops to Africa. He sent doctors. He trained doctors. He sent help to Africa because he knew that the roots of Cuba's culture lay in Africa. This is what I mean about standing up for what you know. Standing up and fighting for what you know is right in your past and changing it. He could have just been content with Cuba. He could have went along with the US and let them back in. He could have did all of those things, but he didn't. And he's an icon of history now. Same with Che. Che could have died an old man in Cuba. Instead, he died a revolutionary way in Argentina, Bolivia. You see? So, take heart. There are others like you. There are others like us. Those are the ones you need to unite with, give your support to. And together, you can begin to change things. So I don't think that people should feel burned out and disheartened because we don't have power now, you know? Everything changes. And believe me, those in power today will not be in power tomorrow. But you'll still be here. You still would have to raise your children. You still would have to stand up for what you need to stand up for to protect your livelihood. So don't give up on that. And encourage others to say, look, man, we might not be strong and powerful right now, but we could organize this little space here. You know, with the Black Panther Party, we weren't that many, but we organized a breakfast program. Hey, our kids don't get no breakfast before going to school, we'll feed them. We don't have no sickle cell testing, we'll test them. Huh? We took it upon ourselves to do these things because we believed that only if we did them will the people understand that they had the power to do these things themselves. They didn't need government to do it. And today, the breakfast program is institutional in all of the schools. Today, health clinics in the community are institutional. Today, many of the programs that they took from us criminal Panthers are today institutional programs that meet the needs of our children or try to emulate meeting the needs of our children, okay? So don't give that up. I really think you shouldn't.
Further questions? Yeah, please.
Nico, thank you so much. We'll not hear you if you have.
Unless you know how to scream.
No, just very quickly, I'm speaking in the name of the Communist Students Association.
You're a communist?
Sure.
They still exist?
Yeah, no.
I'm only joking.
More than you would think.
I'm only joking. Go ahead.
And we were following this whole bullshit as you described it from the university, and we just wanted to express our solidarity and wanted to thank you in your struggle against imperialism. And
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the solidarity. Thank you. Can we get a sister? Somebody got something to say? Don't women speak up around here?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Wa alaikum assalam.
Welcome to Vienna. I just wanted to thank you for all your work, and you're a big role model for me. My question is a simple question. I just wanted to ask if you think the Black Lives Matter movement is a successor organization or in any way similar to the Black Panther Party, or do you think there are major differences? Thank you.
Well, I believe that, first of all, the first part of your question, every organization, every generation, and I believe I want to paraphrase the introduction to Wretched of the Earth. I believe it was done by Jean-Paul Sartre, the introduction to Wretched of the Earth, I believe it was, Jean-Paul Sartre. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, that every generation has a destiny. It either upholds that destiny or it betrays it. So in my generation, the Black Panther Party occurred because of certain conditions at that time. And the position that we took was in accordance with the time that we lived in. The time that we lived in is what created the Black Panther Party. The conditions, the relationships created the Black Panther Party. And it's like that with every organization and every movement. And it's the same with Black Lives Matter. When they emerged after Ferguson and they developed into a movement that typified the conditions of African people and the subjugation to police brutality and police murder. So they grew as that, but they also were different. When I was in the Black Panther Party, we would spend all night making one leaflet, because we had to use mimeograph machines. I don't think any of you are old enough to remember what a mimeograph machine was. See, y'all don't know. A mimeograph machine was a contraption, and I'll call it a contraption, in which you had to put a stencil over a drum, and the stencil had to be typed out on a manual typewriter so it could do go through the carbon. And then you had to correct it with whiteout. And then you had to put it on a drum, on a machine, and crank the drum if it wasn't run by electricity. And each page was printed out from this template that was put on the drum. So every day, if we wanted to produce 1,000 leaflets, we had to stay up to 2 o'clock in the morning at the Ministry of and make leaflets. Today, you get on the internet, you hit the mouse, and you'll see that you have internet revolutionaries. You have Facebook gangsters. You have Instagram jihadists. You have all of these people that got everything to say on the internet, you see? And so organization is no longer a labor that requires collective participation in order to produce something. You see, some demonstrations, like they talked about with the Arab Spring, some of these demonstrations was called over the internet. You know, everybody be at so-and-so Liberation Square at 10 o'clock in the morning. And people showed up. That was impossible when I was organizing. We had to go from door to door, hand to mouth. We had to be in the streets and organize with the people. We had to be in their apartments. We had to take the old women up the stairs in the apartment. And while we were taking them up the stairs, slip leaflets under the door. We had to deal with human beings on a human level. And so the Black Panther Party became what it is and is remembered today because of that. And plus we had swag. You see, swag always counts now. You got to have style. So we always had swag, you know, and in the hood, in the neighborhood, that counted for something, you see. And we had revolutionary swag. We didn't have criminal swag. We had revolutionary swag. Go look at the old pictures of us in the Black Panther Party. Look at my old picture here. I hate to show this picture to people. This is a funny picture. I didn't even know it existed. You see? Where is it? It's in the first set of pictures. I mean, if you look through this book, you'll see that we had swag. Let me see if I can find it. Well, there's pictures in this book that you can see to show you that, you know, at the height of the Black Power movement, black was beautiful. You see? It was not only beautiful, it was powerful. You see? We had flipped the paradigm of white supremacy on its head. You see? So, in that sense, Black Lives Matter is a consequence and a product of this time, just like the Black Panther Party was. We could never bring back the Black Panther Party. That would be a historical anachronism. Taking something out the past and try to put it into the present and make like it's relevant. What comes out of the present has to be a consequence of the results of the people of that time and that place. And Black Lives Matter was that. It was the results of young people taking to the streets with an understanding that in America, black lives didn't matter. And like I like to say, white supremacy has always taught us that it is a question of mind over matter. They don't mind, the racists don't mind, and we don't matter. That's what we mean when we say racism is an issue of mind over matter, okay? We're not talking about it on the same level as Einstein and his law of relativity or whatever. We're talking about it in very simple terms. That white supremacy doesn't care about our humanity, so our lives don't matter. And the history of white supremacy has shown us that our lives don't matter. So when the Black Lives Movement arose here in America, it was a consequence of what that generation of young people had to experience and what they endured. And they got tired of it. And they went to the streets and they built a movement to challenge the power structure that regulated and legalized the trivialization of black lives. So, no, we can't recreate the Black Panther Party, and every movement is a product of its own historical time. And I believe the last question was, the last part of the question was, sister, you asked about well, there is no comparison in the sense that the Black Panther Party, what made it unique in its historical moment was that it was a black cadre organization that was armed. It was an armed black cadre organization. Now that brought with it certain contradictions because it was doing mass work and it had this component to it that was quasi-semi-legal, you see, which that's what led, that contradiction is what led to the creation of the Black Liberation Army and the Black Underground. The Black Underground has always existed in the black radical tradition. There was always an underground. But it was in the 60s that it became more pronounced, was able to draw on the experiences of other revolutionary movements around the world. So this is one of the reasons that the Black Panther Party had solidarity with the Palestinian people. I was on the coordinating committee of the Black Panther Party in New York for solidarity with the Palestinians. We had solidarity, working solidarity with the PFLP. We had a working solidarity with the liberation movements in the Congo, with the liberation movement. And in fact, we sent a delegation to North Korea long before North Korea was considered a pariah nation in 1968. We sent the delegation, and I think we got pictures maybe in there, of the delegation that we sent to North Korea. So the Black Panther Party had a history of reinforcing the tradition of solidarity with other oppressed people. And that was the essence of Garveyism. Pan-Africanism is exactly black nationalist internationalism on a very basic and fundamental scale, if you could say that. So we've always, our movement, from the days of Marcus Garvey up until the Black Panther Party, has always been in solidarity with other people's struggles around the world. And these people didn't always look like us. We were in solidarity with the liberation struggles in Vietnam. We were in solidarity with the people's struggles in Southeast Asia. We were in solidarity with the people's struggles in North Korea. We were in solidarity with the Chinese people's struggle. We were in solidarity with the Cuban struggle. We were in solidarity with all those who resisted imperialism and white supremacy around the world. So I only feel that what I do today, speaking here, coming to you, is a continuation of this tradition. I don't see it as exceptional at all, you know. But the problem with the Black Lives Matter movement is that they had not been in touch with that radical history. Okay, they're getting, some of them activists are getting in touch now. I know a lot of them are seriously talking about how do we empower the African diaspora. A lot of them are involved now in doing projects and humanitarian work on the African continent. And so that's changing. But Black Lives Matter, when it first emerged, wasn't really in touch with the black radical history and the black radical tradition. And it only became in touch with that tradition through the course of the last few years in struggle. Any other questions?
Yes, the colleague. Hello. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa barakatuh.
My name is Jihad. I come...
That's a serious name.
Yes, it is. I don't know where I come from.
Well, you know where you're going, though.
Exactly, I know where I'm going.
Exactly, that's what counts.
I was growing up in Palestine for 17 years. I don't know if my passport is the ground to say I am, to give me, I don't know if the passport is the thing what gave me my nationality. I don't believe this at all. I was born in Saudi Arabia, growing up in Palestine, and I am now since 2015 here. As you said, it's a serious name. Since I came here, I moved here, I faced this kind of problems with my name. It was always this kind of extremely reactions.
But of course.
European, I don't say Austrian, like I'm an actor, so I decided to make a theater play about my name, and I did it.
You're not the guy that made those videos where they have the Muslim in hijab that comes out and throws a fake bomb at the feet, and everybody says, and then it says run. And, have you seen that series?
I have seen this guy.
That is so funny. I mean, it's hilarious. See, this is what I mean about making jokes.
Yeah.
It really, I mean, it pisses them off. You know, there's the guy sitting in the park, in the playground, and the Muslim comes along in garb, drops a paper bag and says, Allahu Akbar, and the title says, run. And the guy breaks out across the pond, dives in the swimming pool. I mean, it's crazy. So I understand what you're going through with the name jihad.
Yeah,
you know?
So I really am so happy to be in your, I thank you so much for your powerful, humanful speech. It's very important to have this kind of speech at this time of our life, because the whole world is very black and very sad, and anybody say it's not like this, then he's blind or he has a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was, no, it's actually, it's so sad. I mean, it's really so sad. As I was growing up in Palestine, I have seen the situation there. I want to say we were in a big jail. We are occupied 3 times, from Israel, from the Palestinian government in West Bank, and from the government in Gaza, Hamas. So we have 3 occupations, not only 1. You know, and so your speech reminds me of Charlie Chaplin.
Charlie Chaplin? Yes. Oh, really?
There's a very important speech in the movie, The Great
But Charlie Chaplin's movies were silent.
Yes, but there's
the subtitles?
There's a movie called The Great Dictator.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
So it reminds me of this, and the first time I saw this, it makes me really cry, because I don't see any kind of humanity in this planet now. I don't believe in United Nations because it's created from the Europeans, let's say. I'm not talking against Europe now, please, don't get me wrong. I think we have paid, as Palestinians, we have paid the bill of the Second World War. It was organized since, as you said, from therefore things like this. So I really wish that things change and the people wake up. I don't know when and how to see like enough for everything what's happening now in the world. Mm-hmm. And I wish things change. And I invite you to watch my theater play. Oh,
of course. I appreciate that. I do admit I have a morbid sense of humor, but I can't say that I seriously laughed in the last 10 years, you know, and that's sad, you know, because laughter is so necessary to human beings, you know, to dance, to laugh, you know, is to express joy in life, to me. And unfortunately, like you said, over the last 10 years or so, I realized that I don't laugh much, you know. I mean, those real laughs, you know, the laughs where tears run down your eyes and you can't hold your stomach and you just can't control yourself, those types of laughs, you know. I haven't had one of those in a long, long time. You're right. The world is becoming a sad place when we see certain things going on and doesn't happen. But I just want to say to you, although you didn't really have a question, I just want to say that, you know, the people that endure the most tend to be people that have the greatest reservoir of spiritual wealth at their disposal. You know, Allah tells the Muslim in the Quran that both wealth and poverty can be a blessing. It depends on what you do with it. The most wealthiest person in the world, their wealth can be a curse if their spirit and their heart isn't pure. And then the poorest person in the world, with no material belongings, with a pure spirit and heart, is much more wealthy than that man with all those material wealth. And Allah recognizes that wealth of our soul and our spirit, our humanity. You know, and I think that's very important. You've had the opportunity to live in places that today are considered hot spots and the focus of global conflict, you know? And I think that you should share that experience with those around you. I think you should share that experience with humility with those around you and use it to tap into their sense of humanity, their sense of connection to where you came from and what you've experienced. Let them feel like they experienced that. And that's what we don't do. We don't really try to experience what is a family going through in Africa when they have to give their child away to an orphanage so that the child could have a life and grow up, because they can't afford to take care of the child. They can't take care of the child. Then the child is classified as an orphan. The child is not an orphan. He has a family, but he was given to an orphanage so that the orphanage could save his life, because they can't, their family can't. How do you think a person gets into a boat crossing the Mediterranean to get to a place where he doesn't even speak the language? Because in his mind, this is the place where he could make a living, he could send money home, and he could be somebody. And he gets in this boat, and people with him drown. Then when he gets to the other side, he's thrown into a camp. And he's brutalized and treated inhumanely, maybe even sold into slavery, like in Libya. Put yourself in those shoes. Have some human empathy for these people, because you created the conditions. Your country, your nation, your history created the conditions that made that person get on that boat and do what they're doing. You're not an innocent bystander. That's my point. Just because we weren't here when King Leopold slaughtered tens of thousands of Africans, don't mean that we don't share the guilt of Belgium. The Belgians did this in the Congo, and they can't undo it. And they can't disassociate themselves from that history. They have to fess up to that history, stand up for it, and say, we are not that Belgium anymore. We are not about that anymore. And what can we do to rectify what we did in the Congo? What can we do? What is it you need us to do? Not what somebody in the UN passes a resolution to do, but what can the people in the Congo have us do to say that we're sorry for what we did. We know what is done, and we want to help you change your life. That's what I'm talking about. So that's what you should use your experience for. Okay? To try to get people to walk a mile, 20 feet in your shoes. And so they could say, damn, I wouldn't want to be that. So you could understand why a child in Palestine would run at a fence only to be gunned down by a sniper. Why a child? Why would boys throw stones at tanks? Don't you empathize with these people? Don't you put yourself in their place? And so, I'm just saying, your personal experience has to be shared with people. And you can't share it with arrogance. You can't share it with, you don't know Jack, you don't know nothing because I did this. That's not how you share it. You share it with your humanity, with your empathy, with your love of self. That's how you share it. So that you can say, well, if you could love me, then you can love my brother. You can love my sister. You can empathize with them. If you could care about me, you could care about them. If you could care about that homeless person sitting on the streets out there that doesn't have a dime, that doesn't have a house, that doesn't have anything, then you could care about homeless people everywhere. And you would be an enemy of landlords and an enemy of real estate corporations that make it possible for that man to be homeless. Huh? That's what I'm saying. And that's what you should use your experience for. Any other questions?
Yes, we have a second next question here.
Thank you very much for your talk, and thank you very much for being outspoken like this. You have touched on how Europe is going to the right again, and you said white supremacy is rearing its ugly head again in Europe. And you have also touched on how the student organization basically did not allow you to speak at the University of Vienna. And now the situation we have in Europe is that these left-wing student organizations are, and sections of the white left basically, are usually those who stand against this Europe going to the right. They are the ones who organizing the demonstrations against the right-wing governments and so and so. But then on the other hand, we have these situations where suddenly these organizations then also do things like banning former Black Panthers from speaking about the black struggle at the university. And you said it is much about the guiltiness, why they do that and so on. I would even say that excuses them maybe a little too much. And maybe you can speak of also in the history. The Black Panther Party has had a long history of working with the white left and different sections of the white left. Do you see are these problems new, or is there a development in a direction where actually sections of the white left more and more become like seem like they just want a piece of the white supremacy cake? Actually, they just want to the power in that whole white supremacy context, or because the Black Panthers, for example, worked with the Weathermen and so on, and sections of the white left. Can you speak of that experience and comment on what can Europe do that those who stand against right-wing governments do not fall into this? Because sometimes it feels to me like as soon as a person says I'm left-wing, they totally don't have to reflect their racism anymore, or their conditioning, or their socialization in a racist society and so on. And I think it's a huge problem. And when I studied, had always huge problems with this student organization and others of this background. And maybe you can comment on this.
Well, I think that takes a very long comment. In fact, that's a session for a seminar. But yeah, a lot of that happens in the U.S. I think, I remember when I brought this to the attention of Marcus and Oliver, that I did a tour in Germany back in the early 1990s. And this is when some of the Baader-Meinhof activists were being released from prison. And the wall had come down, and there was the process of rapprochement between East and West, And I went to Germany on a speaking engagement. When I got to, I think it was Dusseldorf. I forgot where it was. It was someplace like that. Was it Dusseldorf? I can't remember the exact city. But the comrades who were looking out for me there, I went to speak somewhere. I went to an info shop or something, and I was surrounded by these activists. They had baseball bats and everything, and chains, and they were protecting me, right? So I said, what's up with this? He said, well, they're anticipating some type of action from East Germany, from the skinheads and from these neo-Nazis. And I said, neo-Nazis in East Germany? He said, yeah. I said, how is that? And he explained something to me that I found fascinating. You know that when you're young and you're a teenager, you tend to rebel against the status quo. You know, we're rebellious. You know, when you're young, you know, you want to wear your clothes a certain way, you know, you want to look a certain way, you want to hang out with your homies and listen to all types of music that the adults say, oh, how do you listen to that? You know, you do all the things that young kids do. And he explained to me that to the youth in East Germany, for decades, rebelling against the status quo was to adopt a Nazi demeanor and philosophy and attitude. I said, that's not right. I said, that's not true. I couldn't believe it. He said, yeah, because in East Germany, anti-fascism and the Nazis, this was like the mantra of the state. You see what I'm saying? And to the state, anything that smacked of fascism or the old Germany was brutally suppressed, was denigrated and ostracized. So of course, being a youth, let's say, well, if the system hates Nazis, I'm a Nazi. I know it sounds stupid. It's rebellious, but I can understand how that happened, right? But let's go now 10 years later, 15 years later. How does it manifest? That manifests itself in the right and in the, because you got to remember, a lot of these neo-Nazis and racists at that time are now leaders of right-wing political parties. Right now. You see what I'm saying? And they have an agenda, they have a racist platform, and they have a strategic vision that they want to implement. But how does the left fall victim to this type of association? I think in the case of the US, we see that in the Black Lives Matter movement, for instance, we say in the radical black movement that radicals and revolutionaries go into the Democratic Party to die. Okay? That means that, like the brother was pointing out here, about how people get tired of struggling against the system, and they feel that the only way they can make a change is by becoming part of the system. So these leftists might run for political office and try to make like they are distinct from the status quo, like I'm left, I'm for the people, you know, I'm about this, I'm about free education. They do the Bernie Sanders tip, you see? And they go into and they use the Democratic Party for that, but the Democratic and Republican parties are a duality. You know, they are both the same, they're two heads of the same snake. You see? So an activist, a revolutionary who runs on the Democratic Party ticket, rather than organize or rather than run as an independent, rather than create a third party, a revolutionary party, rather than unite with other folks that have interests the same, but they say, look, we got a different agenda here. This is our agenda. They'll go into the Democratic Party and they will become lost to the movement, essentially. You know, and this has happened time and time again. So it's easy for the radical left, as they age, as they grow older, as they seemingly become more irrelevant to what's happening to the youth, that they would matriculate more and more towards the center, more and more towards the status quo. And they become reformers rather than revolutionaries. And I try to point out as often as possible that we are not about reforming white supremacy. That's not my job, that's not my mission, that's not my duty, to reform white supremacy and make it more compatible and more acceptable. My obligation and my duty as a revolutionary, as someone who believes in the people, is to abolish white supremacy. So I'm an abolitionist, if anything, and not a reformist. This gets lost. This is lost. This distinction right now is lost amongst young black people in the U.S. who are beginning to mobilize and organize, because a lot of the funding and some of the monies that's necessary to mobilize people, to bring people's attention to an issue, is coming from foundations, coming from different sources who are about reform, who are about enhancing the system, making the system work better. You see, and that's not to say that some reforms can't have immediate impact on people's lives. They can. Okay, so I'm not anti-reformist to the point where I would take tactical reform and just throw it out the window and say it's meaningless. Because I know people can get out of prison because of a reform. Their families' lives can be changed because of a modest reform. But I know that ultimately, this system that produced those contradictions is not going to be transformed by reform. It has to be abolished. And we have to reconstitute another system, a fairer system, a system where there's restorative justice when it comes to deviant behavior and crimes in our community. A system that recognizes our children, that nourishes our relationships, that bolster our families and bolster our social units. We could create this world, okay? And we create it through the struggles that we wage against the world as it is now. So I know what you're saying. You're absolutely right. The left can be easily co-opted by reformism. It can be easily tricked. I mean, the brothers here was explaining to me how the left, there's some factions of the left can identify with the state of Israel. And that's why, how is that possible? I'm like, I'm bewildered. Duh. How is that? I mean, it is what it is. I mean, if they're left, I mean, how is that possible? Because of the guilt that's attendant to the history of the Germanic states here, Austria and Germany. That guilt, that complicity in those horrible things that were done in World War II means to them that if you talk bad about Israel, i.e. Jews, you're repeating what Hitler and his cronies did. Really? You see? Now, don't look at me and say, how could you make that leap in cognition? Well, they did. Because you're talking about it. You see? So the fact that they made that leap in cognition means to me that although they're left, they have a certain racist sentiment and view of Palestinians versus Europeans and European Jewry. So they see that the lives of Jews that were taken for granted during the so-called Holocaust here, you understand, were so diminished and so dehumanized that they weren't even considered human beings by the Third Reich. They were considered animals. They were considered vermin, literally, by the people who were running the state. And in opposition to that type of history, in their left politics say that the people that were considered vermin and stuff by them must be people that have to be protected. And so I'm not anti-Semitic. They confuse Zionism with Judaism. One has nothing to do with the other. In fact, they do. The relationship is coincidental. Let me put it that way. Okay? One does have something to do with the other, but they're coincidental. So simply because you're anti-Zionist doesn't mean that you hate Jews and that you're anti-Jewish or that you're anti-Semitic. It means that you know what what Zionism created in the secular state of Israel. Zionism is an ideology of reactionary nationalism. It's a reactionary nationalist ideology with a theological proposition as its basis, basically. You know, we had a paper, I don't know if you ever saw it. It was an edition of the Black Panther Party newspaper that said Zionism plus nationalism equals racism. This was the headline on the Black Panther Party newspaper. This was back in 1967, 68. Zionism plus nationalism equals racism. And if that equation hasn't proven itself correct over history, over the long run, I don't know what equation has. That's like Einstein's law of relativity, politically speaking. Okay? Because we do know the history of European Zionism. It has a history, okay? And it had advocates, and it had leaders who went on to found the Israeli state, who went on to manipulate empires and a generation of leaders around the world to create the settler state of Israel. This was a whole process that went down over a period of decades during a very significant part of the 20th century. Okay? And so it's understandable how the left in this country could be delusional enough to believe that anti-Zionism is in effect anti-Semitism. So therefore they're pro-Zionist. They're pro-Israel. You see? And so I can see how they can be confused. You know, if it was Star Trek, you would have to beam them up. You know, they're totally scrambled up. There's no question. You see? But the sad part about it is, and maybe you can, you know, deal with this better than I can, is that you probably know some of these people. So how does that feel? I mean, that's my question to you. How does that feel? You actually know somebody like this, you know, and you realize you really can't talk to them. It's like, really, man? You say to yourself, you really think that? And you like the guy or girl or woman. You see what I'm saying? And you're like, wow, how could you say that? And yeah, this is where he comes in with his experiences, his personal experiences. You know, we have to understand, like Mao Zedong said in Protracted War, that the subjective factor is the dynamic factor in human struggle. The subjective factor is the dynamic factor. It's something that you can't put into a computer and get a program out of. You can't put it in the matrix instead. Human beings will act this way and no other way. And then a human being will come along that's different and act completely out of program. You say, hey, we didn't think about that. You know, we didn't know somebody would actually think like that. You know, you notice the algorithm, what was the name of this digital company that supplied the database for Donald Trump's victory? I forgot. Digital something. Say again? Yes, yes. You see how the guy that blew the whistle on, they explained how they collected human data and how they farmed human data and came up with profiles of people who would vote for Trump if given the opportunity or certain things were said to them. You see? And they came up with this demographic that showed that Trump could win that there was this group that could change the whole election in these 3 states because they were fence sitters. These were people that they had mined their profiles. You know, you get the telephone call, I'm taking a survey, you know, usually you hang up. Sometimes you go along with it because it's funny, right? But they're mining your personal data so they could come up with a profile. And that profile is then fed to politicians so that they could tune their camp. I mean, they took the propaganda, big lie, propaganda techniques of the Nazis to a whole new level. To a whole new level. You see? So they know that human foibles, human frailty, is something that can be used against human beings' own interests. And this is what you have with the left. I mean, you have a left that identifies with Zionism. And yet they consider themselves anti-racist. How could you say that? That's a serious oxymoron. You see? So, yeah, I can understand how in this country and in those countries that shared in the shame of World War II, how you could raise a whole generation that confuses support of Israel with being progressive and leftist, because they consider it they consider themselves, you know, anti-fascist. You see, so yeah, it's a problem you guys got to wrestle with because it's your history. You know, I'm out of here when my plane leaves, so y'all. Y'all gotta wrestle with that crap. I'm going. You know, good luck. You understand? My hat's off to you. If you beat them down, you got it. You know, I'll come for the celebration, you know, and the parade and everything if I'm still around. But yeah, I can see how that happens. And it's because there's a total break. I mean, it's institution. If Vienna University had taught the truth about Austrian history and about the truth of the Austrian Empire and about the truth about fascism and capitalism and its role in creating the contradictions today, we wouldn't have a left like that. They would never see Zionism as something that's progressive. They would never see the defense of white supremacy as something that they advocate. Although they always tell you that they're anti-racist. But it's their racism that allows them to do that. You see? Y'all got a difficult joint. I got to hand it to you, man, so good luck. Any more questions?
Okay, the last question, because I think we should come to an end.
Sorry. Thank you for your talk, Mr. bin Wahad.
Thank you.
My question for you is how you reconcile a sense of nationalism, of maybe feeling as an American, but also with disappointment in American policies. And I come from a mixed background. My father is Palestinian and my mother is Irish. But as many immigrants' story for the United States, I think things have been good for us, although I do have a lot of disappointment with the way things are happening in Palestine. And I went back this summer to see family.
Did they let you in?
Well, after 3 hours of interrogation, they let me in, which I'm sure our colleague Jihad experienced as well. But so my question is how you kind of reconcile that feeling, if you've ever had it, of being, it's a very kind of egocentric question, of feeling like you're American, but at the same time feeling a really strong disappointment with America. I have Palestinian family. I moved here from Oakland a couple years ago, and that's the question, how you reconcile.
Well, first of all, as I stated earlier, I'm not really an American.
Okay.
And I'm a victim of Americanism. That's my first thing. I never had any great expectations of the United States of America. Never. Maybe when I was 11 or 12, you know, I looked at the heroes and sheroes on television, and I said, yeah, that's you know. But I never identified with the Lone Ranger. I didn't identify with Superman. I didn't identify with Batman. I mean, a dude that was a bat, really. I didn't identify, you know, with those superheroes, so there was definitely something wrong with me. And so when we would play cowboys and Indians in the backyard, I would always be the Indian, you know, and I would win. So I never identified with all of those stereotypes of what an American is. But I do also understand that a human being's social conditions and social being determines their thinking. So clearly, I was raised in the United States. I grew up there. And so for all intents and purposes, that culture has formulated me, has given me whatever I have today, you know. But I've never identified with the concept of Americanism because, like I said, I had a history teacher at a very young age who made history very interesting, and he made it clear in the teaching of history that we didn't come here to Plymouth Rock. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock, like Malcolm X said. Plymouth Rock landed on us, you see. The only people that I saw and always thought that were truly Americans, and I'm using that term advisedly, are the native peoples. It was their land that was stolen. They were there before the European settlers came, and their humanity is what permitted the European settlers to survive. Clearly, I've always held that against them. I've always held it against them that winter that the Puritans were about to starve to death, they should let them die. Instead, they fed them, they got them through the winter, they showed them how to do the crops so that they could feed themselves, and then what did they do? They turned around the following year and slaughtered the Indians. So me, I know that back in the day, they should have let them die. In fact, they should have wiped them out themselves. You see? And then when the next group of settlers came, they said, ooh, what? I ain't seen nobody here before. You knew somebody that came here before? I ain't seen nobody. You know? What's that bone around your neck? Oh, man, that's Christopher. You know? My bad, you know. So that looks like, you know. So I'm saying that I don't consider myself an American, so I never had that ambivalence. That's the first thing. I've always had resentment in the sense that I believe that that my ancestors and were treated in a way and developed their ability to survive in a way that made everything American, to me, not worthwhile. But then again, I'm a kid, you know, I grew up here like I was explaining to you. You know, I grew up there, I grew up in the community, you know, so I guess to you guys, you know, and to everybody, you know, I quote American, you know, but trust me, I'm African. The whole of we come from Africa, including you. Y'all just left early and never got back. That's why y'all so whack. That rhymes. I should be a rapper, right? I should be a rapper. That rhymes. Y'all left early, never got back. That's why y'all whack. So, yeah. I mean, we know now from anthropology, now that a lot of racism has been removed from anthropology, and we know that Peking man and Piltdown man were contrived by European anthropology so that they could avoid any lineage to Africa, any lineage to people of color. Then they discover Lucy in Tanzania and in the lakes there, in the lake region there. And now we realize that we all, the human beings, are all descended from one species, from one mother. And she was black. She was African. So how does it feel to know that you guys came from Africa, but y'all just about didn't get back? Okay? So you had to deal with all them glaciers. You had to deal with all them winters. You had to be battling the clubs all up in the cave, the Cro-Magnons and stuff. Y'all had to go through some crap in order to come out Europe. You know, fortunately for us, we didn't have to go through that. We lived in the South. We lived where nature spoke to us. And if you listen to black blues and black music, in black blues, historically in music and black folk music, nature talked to us and we talked to nature. We didn't view nature as hostile. We viewed God creation as benevolent, as something that embraced and nourished us. That's why you have songs using words like babbling brook, speak to me, Mr. Wind. Whereas in the Europeans, up there in the cold north, and you guys up there, the Danes and stuff, those winters were harsh. You weren't talking about to speak to me, Mr. Wind. You was trying to get out of the hawk. You was trying to get out of the wind. It was freezing. So your whole demeanor, your whole approach to nature was different. And you took that approach to nature in the building of your empires, in the building of your states, and how you treated this planet, and how you treated people in this planet. You took that attitude that nourished and made you survive in these cold climates. You used that. And so people who were never familiar with that attitude, were never familiar with that experience, they treated you like they treated every other human being. Look at every experience the Europeans had with the South and see what happened. The original people always greeted them with love, always greeted them with humanity, only to be slaughtered and turned upon because he had a gold bracelet around his neck, a gold chain. And the conquistador says to his buddy, "Yo, Pedro, that's gold, man." Pedro said, "Yeah, so it's a standard. They're gold, man. Yeah, but see that? Don't they got this gold too, man? You know, these people got all this gold. Yeah, man, let's take it from them." Yeah, the natives said, "You want the gold? Yeah, they have it. Nice, huh? You like it?" And these guys, this is crazy. Are human beings' social conditions determine their thinking? And so the European mindset, in a world that's predominantly melanated. You gotta remember, you are a minority on this planet. A serious minority. And that Europe, you know all the maps that we grew up, looking at, we always saw Europe and America as huge, right? In fact, some of us even thought that America was bigger than Africa. And I remember when they changed the map system in the schools in America, the teachers and students were having a nervous breakdown. They couldn't figure their place in the world anymore. Because America and Europe were supposed to be center, and Africa and everything else was supposed to be periphery. But in reality, when you look at the world from space, Europe is a small peninsula of Asia, right? It's a peninsula, a small one at that. In fact, you could damn near fit all of Europe, I think twice, maybe, in the Sudan. So how does this little patch of earth ended up with this world that we're living in now, dominated by white supremacy, greed, and imperialism? How did that happen? It was the experience of Europeans in their own way, their ability to cope, their ability to develop, their ability to rise above the conditions that they were in, that created their character, that created their disposition. Okay? And that's why, once sadly, everywhere Europeans went in this world, we've had to kick them out. They never left voluntarily. I remember an IRA comrade that was in jail with me, O'Rourke. He was accused of destroying, of killing Mountbatten. He was in prison with me in New York, in a federal prison. And he was Irish. This was a funny guy. He used to break me up. And he said to me, "Let me tell you about the British. They never went anywhere that you didn't have to kick them out. They would never leave. We had to run them out. That's the only way." And using that metaphor, using that example, I found historically that the only time Europeans have ever given people back their land and allowed them to live their lives is after they had their ass kicked. Unfortunately, Europeans only relate to a good ass whipping. When you kick their ass, then they start talking about peace and humanity and reconciliation and how let us all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. But you don't whip that ass, you could forget about it. And this is one of the things that I learned in the Black Panther Party. The only reason the police respected us because we would shoot back. If they knew that we wouldn't shoot back, that all we were going to do was sing "We Shall Overcome," I wouldn't be sitting here having a conversation with you right now. I'd be dead. You see? So that ambivalence, my expectations of America were never that, I want to live the American dream, I want to, I don't think that anybody wants to not be successful. I don't think nobody wants to not have comfort. I didn't join the Black Panther Party to be poor. I didn't revel in sleeping on the floor and giving out breakfast program. That wasn't what I wanted my life to be about. You see? So we all want a better life for ourselves. We all want to live, without fear, and raise our children in peace, and everybody does. That's a normal human aspiration. But because of history and because of circumstance, because of power relationships that many times are beyond our control, that's not possible. And so I never felt any ambivalence about the American dream versus the American reality. I've always known that there's two histories to in America, and that's something you really need to take home with you tonight. That there's more than one history of America. There's the native people's history of North America. There's the history of African peoples in North America. There's a history of the Chinese and Asian people who came to America and built the railroads. There's the history of the immigrants from Ireland who came during the potato famine. There's all of these histories of America. And the ruling elite tried to say to us that America therefore represents this great big melting pot of people coming from all over the world that made America great. That's bull crap. That's not true. If America is a melting pot, the only people that had been melted was us. Because every ethnic group that came to the United States, whether they were Asian, whether they were European, whether they came from the subcontinent of India, they all learned one word very quickly, and that word was nigger. They always learned that in this society, you can be better than any nigger. They learned that quick. You see? And so racism is not just something that's manifested by white supremacy. Because we know in the Muslim community in the U.S. that some of our brothers and sisters from the subcontinent are just as racist as any Ku Klux Klansman. It's just that their social being manifests that racism differently. You have a lot of black people in America who believe Koreans are racist and towards black people. Because the Koreans have come in, they opened up vegetable stores and whatever, and they treat their black customers they treat them worse than some of the racists who own stores and things like that. But what black folks don't understand is that Koreans come from Korea. And what happened in Korea? Then you go back to the history of Korea, and then if you just go back to the history from Korea from 1950 on, the majority of Koreans before the World War II never saw a black person in their life. So they couldn't hate on black folks because they ain't never saw none. Right? And then when the first black person that they see is in an American uniform and he's got a gun and he's kicking their door in Busan some goddamn where. That's the first black person he's ever saw. And then when his continent is occupied by the military, and the U.S. military is now integrated, there's black soldiers there. And he quickly learns that the black soldiers are treated like crap by the white authority and the white officer class. That blacks are treated with contempt. That black people have no power, and that they have no control. It's the white man that's running the army that's doing everything. So he adapts the attitude of those who are in control and in power. And so when he comes to America, you got to remember, you got to get vetted to come to America. When he comes to America and he opens up his little store, he's going to open it up in the poor black community because that's the only place he's going to be able to get a shop and open it up. And then the poor black people who come in to buy things, he has this attitude that he got when he got matriculated here, that these people need to be watched. They're criminals, they're thieves, you understand? And I could understand that because I remember my mother telling me how when during the Korean War, how the soldiers burned a village down and it was a black unit, or it was black soldiers. You see? So these histories are all part of America's tableau. Okay? But I like to say, for my purposes, that there's three basic histories that govern the United States. There's the history of the white settlers, there's the history of the native people, and there's the history of people of color, namely African Americans that I'm particularly talking about. Okay? And I know that there's other ethnic groups that are now becoming a majority, and this is what we're seeing in America. America is becoming a majority country of color. And this is what frightens and scares white males, that soon the majority of Americans are going to be African and Latino. And it terrifies them. This is what terrifies Europe. That if they allow the influx of migrants from the places that they colonized, then Europe is going to decidedly become nations, multi-ethnic, multiracial nations. And white male privilege will no longer be the epitome of power. Okay? So they camouflage it with all of this crap about we need, the migrants are taking jobs from us. It is not a job that a migrant would do that the average European would do. They're the ones that's cleaning the toilets. They're the ones that's sweeping the streets. They're the ones that's doing all the jobs that most Europeans don't want to do. They're the ones that's picking the fruit during the harvest, back-breaking work, picking it by hand, you know. They're the ones that's doing all of those basic fundamental things in a post-industrial society that you wouldn't want to do. But yet and still you'll turn your back on them and say that they're not hardworking, they're criminals, they're rapists, they're thieves. We can't allow them in because what are we? We're not criminal. We're not rapists. Hey, we're not thieves. Tell you're not rapist. Tell me that you're not rapist to my great-great-grandmama. Huh? Tell it to them African women that were raped routinely in the Middle Passage, nothing to this day. Tell me you don't rip children from families. Huh? When you took native children from their families and put them in schools to Europeanize them so that they wouldn't learn their culture, so they wouldn't know their language. You ripped them from their parents. And then you're going to tell me that American, it's not American to do these things to migrants? Hey, this is American as apple pie. This is your history. And this is what happens when you deny history. Then when you see migrant workers, migrant people seeking a better life, and their children ripped from them and put in prison at the border. Now people are crying on TV. You had one announcer on television on MSNBC crying about U.S. immigration policy that's taking children from their parents. But she didn't cry about all of the African children that were taken from their parents and murdered. She didn't cry about the 2.5 million people who are in prison and their dads and stuff have been railroaded into prison. They have no family. She doesn't cry about mamas who have to put their children up on welfare because they have no money, they have no home, they can't get no Social Security. Where were the tears for all of these people? Now all of a sudden everybody's crying about kids being ripped from their families at the border. It's hypocrisy. That's my point. If you're going to cry for babies, cry for all the babies, man. Don't just cry for the babies now because it's fashionable. Cry for all the babies, man. Cry for all the mamas, man. You see? And if you ain't going to cry for all the mamas and all the babies, I don't want to hear that mealy mouth, tear stuff. Because you're phony. You're not as sincere. Because the whole of we are human. The whole of we come from Africa. You see? And I think that because I never identified with America like that, I think that's why I'm able to stand and say what I'm saying to you without feeling guilty, without feeling like I'm lying, I'm perpetuating falsehoods. I feel that I'm telling you the truth, and I'm telling you from my own heart, not from some script that says, well, I'm American, and and therefore, this is what I stand for. No, I don't stand for anything that's American.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we should come to an end now. We have tomorrow also the opportunity to hear you lecture about new age imperialism and democratic fascism. Thank you for coming. Before you go, just want to draw your attention to the books on the table. You can also buy this book with articles also from Dhoruba bin Wahad, and we have also the DVD concerning this topic. And there is also a German translation of Still Black, Still Strong. This is not for selling because it's our own only. It's very hard to get it. Yeah, it's sold out.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, unfortunately.
I'm not getting any residuals. I'm so broke. How come they selling my book and I'm broke? Man, I should be like Noam Chomsky or something.
But we try to get the translation for this book also.
Oh, yeah.
As we discussed today, so that we can publish it in German. Tomorrow, 6:30 again. Thank you for coming. We depend on your donations, of course. Janub is independent, so we need donations. And also the association which was hosting us, AfriPoint, please give a donation and fill your name in the list. Dhoruba, thank you very much, and thank you for coming and clearing all the heat today. Thank you.
I got to commend you guys.
Yeah. Until tomorrow. Thank you.